I wanted to make a walkthrough video covering just some key tasks. Some are new and some are just extensions of things you've been doing all year. So, getting up to speed on this, just because I know how competent you are with, the data entry shouldn't be difficult. But, obviously there's certainly going to be some things that will go over quite a bit throughout the remainder of the year, and certainly can touch on any questions that may come up. So just quickly looking over some of the things that we'll touch on. Let's begin with notes for students in complete status. I'd like to just make sure we know what an ideal complete status note looks like, just so we can continue to kind of put in the most relevant information for students who can sit class and are complete. So we'll go into the spreadsheet right now, and we'll take a look at Donna Dumal. So she's complete, and it's just a matter of spelling this out if it's the case. Just using this kind of as the starter thing, complete, period, uh, so I guess this actually should be all mandatory docs, has all mandatory docs, checklist. It's indicated that she's a start over, CTE and learning evals, spelling all that out. I think she happens to be a student that's from outside the country, so that's spelled out. Because of that situation, unable to fax or email the previous school, and just kind of thoroughly noting the background of the situation. It's key in just spelling out each component of the scenario. So if somebody has all the mandatory docs, just spelling that out. If they have a checklist, marking that down and using kind of this light purple color to indicate that the checklist is created. Writing out that they have the CTE and learning evals. And if they happen to be a start over, just kind of giving that brief blurb. I think asking Pam if there's any question on on what to say would be helpful. And then in green, marking can sit class if that's the case, if they do have everything. We'll look at another person that's in complete status that I think is a strong note. We're actually going to take a look at Leslie Blunt. Complete, has all mandatory documents. That's obviously, if they're complete, that's going to be the case, but it's literally spelling it out, has all mandatory documents. Blunt has a bridge plan, highlighting either the bridge or checklist in purple to indicate that that's been done. Has a receipt, test history, 504, learning evals, in completed CTE form. The completed CTE form, as you probably well know, is just when it's actually signed by both the student and a team member and it's fully done, meaning all the hours for work history are there. This even has noted that she has a letter of completion. This is also important. Pam emailed CPS regarding OGTs on 10/11/19, received test history, only needs math. And the note's a little bit more extensive than that. Indicates that she's failed 19 times. Pam's writing a 504. She can't sit class. And then in blue, has SAFE and ODE app. I know you've been doing that and marking that in blue when that's the case. But it's just very important to mark out every component. Do they have all the mandatory docs? Writing has mandatory docs. Do they have a bridge or a checklist? Marking that. Do they have a receipt? If they, do they have a receipt? Obviously, that's going to be mandatory if they don't have a transcript already in order for them to sit class. And then just kind of detailing each other thing that the students brought in, whether it's an IEP or, making sure, and we'll work, to make sure Pam's on the same page here. that when she requests test history, which is often not included with students' transcripts or an IEP, that you're made aware so that can be noted. We have to note when Pam requests test history or an IEP, just so, if we're waiting quite a while, we have a date when that was requested. So when we follow up with the school district, we can go to the spreadsheet and say, hey, we reached out on this date, just following up, and it can be more tangible. But recording if the student has all mandatory docs, recording and spelling out if they have a CTE and if that CTE is complete, um, spelling out if they have the learning evals fully completed, making sure that that's part of the note. Do they have a transcript or a transcript receipt, making sure that's part of the note. And then also noting, if necessary, if it was not on the transcript, which again, it's often not, were the OGTs or the test history requested? When was that test history requested? And then was an IEP requested? That's not going to be for every single student, but a significant amount of students will need to have an IEP requested, just making sure that that's all noted, especially when students are in that complete status, making sure that we have all the nuances written out and noted. Certainly can work together closely to make sure that kind of the wording, makes sense, and that it's detailed without being too nuanced. I think that there are some very good examples of what it should look like, again, for the complete CanSIT students, but certainly want to continue to go over that and make sure that everything's clear. But just noting those items is going to be very important, just so, again, we can be really on top of each student's situation as thoroughly as possible. Okay, so that's kind of touching on the notes for students in complete status. Just going back and looking at the incomplete status, incomplete still needs transcript and evals. Again, I think that's fine for the incomplete students. But when we get them to complete, I would like for it to be more spelled out what is allowing them to be complete, just so we know. Is it that they only have a transcript receipt? Because, again, you can sit class if you have a transcript receipt, or do they have a full tilt transcript? Just drilling down into a little bit more detail. Like this one says, in ODE, complete has all mandatory documents. Checklist, transcript, OGTs, CTE form complete, learning evals, letter of completion, CanSIT class. Just being able to drill down and write out, okay, are they able to sit class because they do have a full transcript, because they do have OGT history, and if, applicable, they do have an IEP. Spelling out all those nuances once somebody gets into a complete CanSIT status is really important, just so we can be as thorough and on top of each student's particular situation as possible. So hope that makes sense. Most certainly don't mind going over that as much as needed, so we can have that consistency and continue to have kind of a good pulse on each student using that enrollment status tab on the sheet. So that's that. Okay, staying on the lookout for high priority students. This kind of goes to the note that I had written about, like when the optimal time is, or who the highest priority case is versus who the lowest priority case is, to create the Ohio ID, to create the started FY20 ODE application. And again, if applicable, if the student has not passed all OGTs and is within an age range where OGTs are necessary, to create the tied account and the SSID. So, just looking at this, it's pretty obvious when a student's credit complete and they're put in Slack by one of the teaching one of the teachers, that's a time where we want to make them a very high priority, making sure that the Ohio ID is done very promptly for them, making sure that they get an ODE started, FY20 application. And again, just making sure that it is in FY20. Some students have an FY19 or another year application that's withdrawn, or maybe just sitting kind of idle in started status, just making sure that they're converted over to FY20 and started status for this particular school year. And then again, if relevant, and the student needs OGTs, making sure that they're in tied with the SSID at that point. So the number one on the lookout person, or the number one person to look out for, is going to be that person that's put in Slack as a credit complete, or one of the credit complete folks. The other one, or the other thing I think to think about and to do, is when a student is scheduled for OGTs and they're in the OGT schedule, to make sure that you know what test attempt it is, meaning, have they attempted all of them? Could this potentially be the last test needed? I get the results will be pending, but is this their last potential attempt? Meaning, are we waiting on results for the other ones? And if all the results come back positive, could they be done? If that's the case, and you've been able to research that, you know that they're on their last test or their last possible test, again, great time. That's going to be a very high priority case to go through all the stages with the Ohio ID, the ODE FY20 application and started status. And then, of course, we're past the point where the tied account's created, because obviously they're on the OGT schedule. But if that would happen not to have been done, certainly getting that done quickly. But again, if it's their last test, it's pretty improbable that that would be the case. But most certainly keeping a pulse on each day when we're looking at the testers that are scheduled. Are they ready to be put in? Of course, they should have the Ohio ID if they have the SSID, but are they ready to be soft started with an FY20 app? So really keeping a close watch on where somebody is, where a student taking OGT is in terms of their progression. Was that the last one that they needed to take? Because again, very, very important to get them in with a started FY20 ODE application. Okay. Here's one that, is a little bit more impromptu. Pam, Kate, myself, there may be a student that just walks in just incredible position that, we they just walked in great shape. What can you say? Because we have rolling enrollment and new students literally every day, someone may come with 1 or 2 credits to do. They're either age exempt or past all the OGTs. And just very quickly, we know that they could possibly finish the program. So again, not an everyday case, but just keeping a close watch for when we ask, or when we share that somebody is in great position, they only have a couple credits left, or, they're just very close. They could be close to completing the program. They're a new student, to make sure that they get on the higher priority end of things for their Ohio ID, their FY20 application, and then, a tied if applicable. But mainly if we would share somebody in that situation, they'd either pass the OGTs coming in, or they're age exempt. So the tied aspect of that is going to be probably not applicable, but making sure that we get the ODE app rolling with the Ohio ID is going to be imperative for that situation. Another situation will be when a new student comes in and they finish their test. So we're talking about somebody who can sit class, they're new, and they just get a test done. That person, again, if there's not a lot of other things going on at that very moment, that's a good candidate just to get ahead of the wave on. And even if they're not close, they just got a test in. If you're not working on anything else at the time that would supersede it in this kind of level of priority, that person would come next, followed by a student that can sit class that has not done any test. So that's kind of the general thing, but it is looking at the completed test log when you do have time where they're not higher priority circumstances, and looking at, okay, this is a new student, they can sit class, have they done a test or not, just to determine, okay, who's going to be higher on the prioritization list. Okay, so that's just really keeping a good pulse on, who needs these things the most immediately, just so there aren't circumstances where, things are getting backlogged and the highest priority people get the most time and energy. Okay, I think that that's fairly self-explanatory. Okay, this is something that will be new, but not incredibly complicated. Kate presently works with Glacia on all the downtown enrollment. Okay, very simply what happens if Glacia enrolls a student that's incomplete and cannot sit class, Glacia will email Kate a sheet that shows exactly what the student's missing that's making them incomplete or ineligible to sit class presently. It's just the sheet that we use on the front cover of the paper folder that shows all the mandatory documents, all the steps that need to be completed. Glacia has filled in with the date what steps and what documents have been brought in. She also obviously leaves blank what has not been brought in. When you receive that, it's just a matter of acknowledging that it's been received and then putting on the enrollment status spreadsheet that student's status. So putting in the name per usual, the incomplete note based on what Glacia's given you, and then the location is downtown and the date, phone number, email, all that good stuff. So when Glacia has an incomplete student, she does not send up the docs in piecemeal. She just sends up basically what's missing. So she sends the sheet that shows what the students brought in and what's missing. So an incomplete note can be made right away, but we don't have the kind of piecemealing of scanning a little bit then and then a little bit more the next day. That's all saved for when the student actually is fully complete with all the steps and eligible to sit class. So working with Glacia on the incomplete students is just surely getting that one piece of paper that shows where they're at and making the proper note based on what's on that sheet. And then identically, when a student is fully complete, she will email you. And typically the email is one PDF with the enrollment status, or I'm sorry, not the enrollment status, with the enrollment packet, with the learning evaluations, with the completed Career Tech elective form, with their license, with their social security card, et cetera, et cetera. She will email you that, but it will be one kind of compiled document with all those things together. Usually what Kate does is she'll print all those out because we do make a paper folder and then just scan it in one by one and put it into the Google Drive and the Z Drive, just as we do everything else. So again, Glacia emails Kate and we'll just shift it to having her email you. If the student is incomplete and not able to sit class at the time, she sends just the items that are missing on one piece of paper so that can be noted and put into the system. If the student is complete and eligible to sit class, she will send, like I said, that big compiled document that has all the proper paperwork in that makes the student complete. Again, simplest process on that is to just simply print out that PDF, make a paper folder, and then scan in each document and then make the appropriate note for that student. So yeah, that's working with Glacia in the downtown students to make sure that they get into the enrollment status sheet as well as scanned into the Google Team Drive and the regular Z Drive. Last item, the Invictus High School. So Don has partnered with Invictus High School as a 22 plus program. I just gave you access to the Invictus Team Drive. They have a separate team drive. We'll go over this, just very softly because there's not a high volume of enrollment presently. I don't expect there to be a ton, but it would just be helpful to know the process when they do get a new and complete student. So Invictus has their own team drive. It looks like this. They not only have the team drive with the student folder, but they have student enrollment status sheet. The notes are identical to the way we take notes. They have a test log just like we have a test log. And then, I created a safe tab. I've actually been putting the safes for their student on our spreadsheet. It would be wise to start making sure that we get their safes on here. But because their students enroll online, it is a bit different just in terms of like the documents than when our guys enroll online. Or I'm sorry, than when our guys enroll, because they enroll in person even if they're online. So just really quickly looking at the mechanics on this. So when a student enrolls online for Invictus, I get alerted and I get their learning evaluations and their enrollment form and their CTE form. What I will simply do is I will print those items out when they're available, and we'll make a paper folder just like we would for a student that walked in the door at Melrose or downtown. So we'll print out the documents. But the difference in the difference in where you would scan them to and note is that you would just simply put the stuff in the Invictus team drive and all note on the folder. Whomever gives you the folder will note on the folder that it's an Invictus student and not a Don student, just so this can be put into the proper space. But again, not a whole heck of a lot different than the Don setup. There's a student folder, just making a folder like you would for any Don student. Pardon me. So once that folder's been made, all the notes again would go in their spreadsheet, just following the same kind of setup that we use for our 22 plus guys, putting the name in, whether they can sit class or not sit class, putting in the date. We don't usually do the email or phone number because Invictus follows up quite a bit with the students in their program. So just putting in the basic note. But again, if you see an Invictus student, just know to put their information in to their team drive and not the Don team drive. So that's that. There is one very final step that I wanted to show, and I'm going to actually close a couple of these tabs. And this is just something so it doesn't catch you off guard. If you go to log in as me within the Ohio ID system, so let's say you're logging in to do a started FY20 app, I have access to both the Invictus and Don 22 plus portals. Okay, and here's what I mean, because that probably sounds confusing. But here's really simply what it means once this loads up. When you get past the dashboard and you're on this particular page where you select program, by default previous to the winter break, it was just Don and you chose the program. Now it can be Don or Invictus. Let's say we're going to choose Don. Then it's the same old steps. It's choosing the 22 plus program, and then everything is identical from there. We'll let it load up. Nothing is different. But the different, well, I guess the overall difference though is you have to choose whether you're going into my profile and working on a Don student or working on an Invictus student. And we can talk about how to put in the Invictus students at another point. Just want to kind of get you up and rolling with just putting and again, their enrollment isn't high. I think there are 4 active students presently. And when we get a case that needs to be scanned in, we can go over it. But yeah, just note that you will have to now select Don or Invictus versus what we previously had where it was just Don. So when I go back to dashboard, again, it presents me, when I do my select program at least, it presents me with the ability to choose Invictus or Don. So it's just making sure that you're aware that now there are 2 options versus 1, and that any information's being put in under the right school. Okay. So just wanted to make this walkthrough video. I know that there's a lot to go over just day to day for practice and making sure everything's tight. And of course, there are always those kind of bizarre scenarios that are outside of the framework of what can easily be explained. So we'll work closely. We'll make this as easy as we possibly can. But I think this walkthrough will hopefully give a good start to some of the basic things that we want to cover. Thanks a lot.